Hello and welcome back to an FEZ show. It has been a while actually. We've tried to get a show done, but schedules have been here and there. So we've been about a month, and there's been a bit of Formula E news that we're going to cover today. That some a bit old, some a bit new. But joining me as always is the one and only Edward Hunter and Mr. Jack Pickering. Hello boys, how are you?
Hi Jack, good to be back. Yeah, scheduling's a nightmare, but yeah, good to get stuck into Formula E stuff again.
Yeah, and great to see you both again for the show. Good news, it was my birthday a couple of weeks ago on the 2nd, so that was good fun. It rained all day. And unfortunately, on the bad news, we did get some very sad news a couple of days before that, actually. Jean-Eric Vergne's race engineer, a guy called Pascal Tortosa, very sadly passed away just very suddenly at the age of 49. He was a really well-regarded guy in the paddock. There's a great story about him showing up to New York for Jean-Eric Vergne's first title decider that he ended up winning in season 4. That he showed up in a cheetah costume he built himself out of paper mache and stuff. So not only really successful, won 100 races in motorsport, but also a really funny guy, really well loved, and I'm sure will be very much missed in this season. A big blow for Techeetah, big blow for Formula E as well.
Indeed, and obviously everyone here at Formula E Zone obviously will extend our condolences to the family, obviously to the team of Pascal. Obviously a sad time for them. But as we move on with the show, to move on to some happier notes, let's talk about Maximillian Guenther, because I think this was a bit of a shock, Pico, because, well, I suppose it was rumblings that he was not going to stay at BMW, but he has moved to Nissan. So, thoughts on the initial move? Because BMW kept Jake Dennis, and obviously Jake Dennis had a great end to the season, but Maximillian Guenther was their guy, became that BMW driver, got their first, became sort of their lead driver come season 6, and was brilliant. But obviously now he's moved away to Nissan. So, what did you make of the move?
Well, I think it's one that comes as a bit of a surprise. I don't think any of us really saw this coming. It was pretty much widely known that Max Guenther wasn't going to stay in that Andretti team, but to head to e.Dams was a bit of a surprise. We knew that Ollie Rowland was moving on to Mahindra. There were rumours about the switch back, so Lynn would move from Mahindra to Nissan, and there was also Daniel Kvyat and Alex Albon being named in there. Obviously, Alex Albon we now know is going to be back in Formula One next year with Williams. Daniel Kvyat is now looking more and more likely that he has got a spot in Formula E, but it looks like more at the Dragon team now. So it's definitely one that's came as quite a surprise, because no one really touted that seat was going to go to Max Guenther. But I think it's great that he's staying in Formula E. I think he does need that new start, because he had an all right season, and I think that sums up basically 24 out of the 25 drivers, I guess, last season. But yeah, I'm happy that he's got another chance, because last year he was beaten by Jake Dennis. Yes, Jake had those 2 wins, and a win basically took you from 15th in the championship to 3rd every race. But yeah, I think it will be a decent switch for him. But that team, I think they need to pick up their game. They had a tough season last year, especially for Seb Buemi. So Buemi either needs to beat Max Guenther, or we might not see Buemi in Formula E for much longer. But Max, I think if he comes into that team, does well, then I think he could be the team leader going forward.
That's interesting. How do you see that battle though between Maximillian Guenther and Sebastian Buemi? Because Sebastian Buemi and Ollie Rowland, they got on quite well, but it was a good battle, right? Whereas Maximillian Guenther's got a point to prove, whereas Ollie Rowland sort of came in with no really any point to prove when he moved. Everyone sort of knew how good he was, and he was the underdog, and he competed with Buemi and gave Buemi problems. Now Maximillian Guenther is a known quantity, right? Race winner. And Buemi hasn't been at that level. So how do you see that rivalry? How do you think that battle between those two is going to go down?
I do think it was interesting, because obviously Buemi has had a really tough season. A lot of it was due to, I think he was having some kind of technical issue throughout the whole year that I don't think Roland was suffering with, and they only ended up they haven't quite revealed what it is Nissan because they're quite cagey, but they only sort of let us know that they sort of fixed it in the last couple of weekends. I think it was after London that they finally were able to fix it, and Boemi was a bit more competitive, at least in qualifying in Berlin. But yeah, it's definitely, his confidence will have taken a knock from that. And Maximillian Guenther, it was vital that Nissan signed somebody who had like a proven pedigree in Formula E in the recent couple of years and could really set the timing screens alight, because they really, I have to say, I think Nissan really missed a trick when they basically didn't offer Roland enough money. He lost interest and went to Mahindra, and that's what's caused them to sort of need to get a replacement driver in. I do think it was an interesting choice because there were a couple other names floating around, like Alex Albon was floating around for a while. Obviously, he's ended up going to Williams. Kvyat, we don't know quite what's happening with him, whether Dragon are going to sign him up or not in place of Joel Eriksson. But we'll have to see what happens there. But I do think Nissan needed someone strong. Guenther is a great choice. He had a difficult season himself where he was kind of shown up by Jake Dennis. So I think both Boemi and Maximillian Guenther have got sort of something to prove this season, but perhaps less so Maximillian Guenther because he did at least win in New York, whereas Boemi finished like behind what was it, Nico Muller, who only did about half the season. So that's pretty unfortunate for Boemi, although he was a bit unlucky in certain races, I would argue, where he got disqualified, for instance, from fourth in London through no real fault of his own. But yeah, definitely it's going to be an interesting season to have to see how they do. And like I said, I think both of them have got something to prove, and it really depends if Nissan can finally get the best out of that new package introduced mid-season in season 7.
I want to throw a question to both of you, a bit off kilter. We know that this season was really competitive, right? It was probably the most competitive season, and we're potentially going into another competitive season where, you know, the only things that the teams can do this season is to improve the software. There's no hardware differences from season 7 to season 8 because of the 2-year cycle. So, as a team boss, as an owner of a team, does that, with it being so competitive, is that harder to judge a driver's ability because there are so many unknowns, and obviously with the qualifying system you can be caught, you can be unlucky, right? So did that sort of, like a Maximillian Guenther for example, did that like hurt his chances of keeping that BMW seat because he was a bit unlucky maybe at the start of the season, couldn't get that momentum struggled, but you know, he could move to Nissan and have a fly and be back to the Maximillian Guenther we know? Or is it easier? Well, it's really competitive and you didn't shine, young man. Therefore, it's you know, out you go. You know, we need, if everyone's competitive, we need you to shine. So, is it easier, do you think? Well, start with you, Pico, to sort of assess a driver, or do you think it's harder to assess a driver?
That's a tough one. I think one thing's certain. I think Formula E now has the closest, I think, 4-wheel grid in the FIA bracket. I think this championship is so close now that you can't really tell who's in front. So those gains, I think, if you shine, I think you are heralded as something brilliant. However, as we saw last season, like, you could be one of the quickest drivers, and if you're out in Group 1, then you are starting no higher than 14th, sunshine. And yeah, it's just one of these things. I think Formula E is one of the most it's just so competitive now that, yeah, it is really hard to judge who and what the pecking order is, and especially with the qualifying format that will change for next season. That's something that we'll get on to a bit later on. But yeah, it's an interesting one. I think that honestly, my answer is I don't know. I genuinely don't know.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. You seem like you were going for the easier one, right? You seem like you were talking as if it was the easier option, right? So like, okay, well,
I
you
was
shined.
waffling for 4 minutes is what I was doing.
You shined, therefore you're clearly the better one, which Jake Dennis did towards the end. So he was shining. So BMW kept Jake Dennis rather than sticking with their known quantity of Maximillian Guenther. Ed, what do you think?
Well, it's interesting because I was writing an article a couple of months back about the Mahindra drivers, because obviously Alex Lynn has ended up losing his seat and is looking pretty certain to leave Formula E. He won't be there next season, even though he was much higher in the points than Alexander Sims, who has been kept on. And it was interesting looking at the qualifying record because they were basically hovering between Group 2 and 3 the whole season. And Lin was, I think, only out-qualified like 2 or 3 times by Sims throughout the whole season. It was quite impressive, actually. Particularly towards the end of the season, the stats were overwhelmingly in favour of Alexander Lin. But I do think there were a couple of extenuating circumstances, like, say, Sims would have the car in Puebla, he had a thing where the car completely failed and he got no running in free practice, and he was able to somehow qualify really well and finish ahead of Lin in the race. So I don't think qualifying is the be all and end all, but you do have to take into account the different groups that people were in. So I'm sort of in the more forgiving camp, where I sort of think, well, Buemi had a really bad season, but he was, well, I think also he was in Group 4 and failed to shine when there were conditions that really should have played to his strengths. But like I said, we had this undiagnosed issue that was diagnosed, resolved, and then they haven't gone public about it, I don't think. So maybe the chassis was bent, I don't know, for Buemi. So that's hard to say. But for Guenther, I think he genuinely really excelled in qualifying, wasn't quite so strong in some of the races in Season 7, especially compared to Dennis, of course. And the other thing is, final thing for Andretti, we really should start calling them Andretti rather than BMW. BMW still run the powertrain, of course, because it carries over from last season, but they're Andretti now, they're not BMW anymore. So got to rewire our brains for that. And interesting, who's going to get that second Andretti seat as well. I heard a lot of rumours about a guy called Carl Kirkwood, who is sort of one of their Indy light stars at Andretti. So it'd be interesting to see, because they're very keen to keep him on the roster and not let any of the other teams pinch him. So it would be interesting to have another American driver in Formula E, because I haven't had one in a while, I don't think.
Yeah, that was my next question, actually. So we'll head to Pico for that. So who are Andretti going to go with now? Because, and we are thinking it's going to be that American thing, but then I just read before we started the show that, you know, there's a way for Andretti to sort of go in via F1 as well. So maybe, you know, whoever was thinking of being in Formula E could maybe potentially be going to Formula 1. And obviously Andretti have a wealth of drivers, you know, and do they do an IndyCar and a Formula E season at the time? So could we see an Alexander Rossi doing that? Could we, you know, is the door open for any potential Andretti driver? You know, I'm a massive Ryan Hunter-Reay fan. I'd love to see Ryan Hunter-Reay be chucked into a Formula E car and the chance to interview Ryan Hunter-Reay. That would be my personal favourite, but I can't see it happening. But, Pico, where on earth do you think Andretti go with that second seat?
It's an interesting one. I've heard the name Ollie Askew, who some people might remember last season drove for the Arrow McLaren Schmidt-Peterson team in IndyCar, and then lost his seat to Formula E alumni Felix Rosenqvist for this season. But he's done a few races here and there, so he's been linked there, but he has also been linked with a few other seats in IndyCar. He did a couple races at the end of the season with the Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing. I hope I said that right, but yeah, he did a few races in the number 45 car, and he's been heavily linked to that seat as well. For Andretti at the moment, it is kind of we don't know who's going to go. I don't think that there's many people who know is going to be in that second seat. It's not the open secret that Ollie Rowland leaving Nissan was. But yeah, I think if they had their heart set on Max leaving the team after Berlin, then I'm sure they knew they've known something for a couple of months. But we're in October now. The testing is still 1.5 months away, but yeah, I don't think anyone's really none the wiser to who's going to take that Andretti seat for this season.
Ed, any suggestions?
I don't know. We talked about Carl Kirkwood earlier. I remember I really thought Matthew Brabham got a really raw deal in Formula E. He did like 2 races. And last we saw of Matthew Brabham was him crying by the side of the road in Punta del Este after crashing out. I'd love to see him get another shot, because I think he's still young enough to make a decent career in Formula E. But I do get the feeling Andretti in recent years. They've gone for sort of, remember when Guenther was sort of the next big thing and he was going to stay at BMW Andretti for like many years, and then I guess BMW leaving has sort of made him think, I need to get with another manufacturer, and Nissan was sort of the open door after Roland left, which was, like you say, an open secret. So yeah, it does feel like Andretti had gone back to the days of just a high turnover of drivers. Whoever they hire, it may not be necessarily a long-term solution to their driver problem. It definitely seems Dennis next big thing at the moment, but we'll have to see. We'll have to hope he has a decent sophomore season, as they say.
I just had a thought. What if they go for a current F2 driver? I mean, they could if they did want to do their future more than just a seasonal thing, they might pick an F2 driver. I know that Dan Ticktum has been touted to go to Dragon as well. It's between him and Daniel Kvyat is what we've heard for the second Dragon seat. But yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit biased. I do like Dan Ticktum, so I would like to see him in Formula E. But it's an unpopular opinion because I know lots of people don't. But I do like Dan Ticktum, so I think maybe going for a Formula E driver, for Formula 2 driver even. Then yeah, I think there's a fair chance that they could do something there.
Yeah, for me, I feel like Michael Andretti definitely wants an American driver in that second seat. So I feel like it will be an American driver. Who? We don't know. But let's move on to a more established Formula E driver in our season 3 champion, Lucas Di Grassi, who has moved to Venturi. Now, is this a one-year deal? Well, it probably is a one-year deal, right? Is this a one-year deal for Lucas Di Grassi to try and just see what comes up in Gen 3 if McLaren were to join, or do you think this is a long-term project here with Edoardo Mortara and Lucas Di Grassi? Is this Lucas Di Grassi's, Ed, best chance of winning a championship again by being at Venturi?
Well, Venturi's definitely got a lot more investment than it used to. I remember Alejandro Gag's brother-in-law, Aznar, is now one of the investors in the team. So you would hope that maybe they would get a different livery from the sort of black and white one they used the last season. I sort of feel a bit sympathy for Norman Nato because I thought towards the end of the season he was finally getting it together, but perhaps it was just a little bit too late to really make a difference. And Lucas, being a bigger name, was always going to be the bigger draw, I guess. And they were always going to keep Ido because you can tell Susie Wolf just absolutely loves Ido Mortara, and he rewards that faith with consistently really good performance, runner-up this past season. So is it Lucas's best chance of getting another driver's title? I think it could be, actually. I think I don't quite see another manufacturer taking a punt on Lucas Di Grassi, even though obviously he's a world champion. But for a team like Venturi, it is a big draw having a former world champion in the books. So it'd be interesting to see how he gets on, especially compared to Mortara. Another thing Lucas has talked about, he's talked a little bit about what he wants to do after his Formula E career. He's talked a lot about moving to DTM if he's going to continue as a driver. So it looks to me like it's going to be 1 or 2 seasons at Venturi for Lucas, and then I think he might set his sights elsewhere to a new horizon maybe. So it's definitely an interesting move. I still think Mortara is going to blow him in the weeds, and I kind of hope he does, to be honest, because I've sort of gone off Lucas in the past few years.
I love Lucas. I love him. I love Lucas to pieces. He's absolutely fabulous to interview, and I don't want him. I don't want him off the grid effectively because I think he's good, and I think he's good for Formula E. He adds that little bit of rivalry there, but he's got that Mercedes powertrain right behind him, which arguably, Jack, was the best powertrain. Arguably, right, one of the best powertrains last season, right? Because if we looked at the start of the season with Mercedes, they looked like the outright favourites. Tech Cheetah obviously came into it, but obviously it was very close towards the end. But Venturi were competitive last season, and the most competitive they've been for a while with that Mercedes package. So obviously with software updates, which Mercedes will do, which will be available to Venturi, surely that puts Di Grassi in the hot seat, right? That revitalises him.
I'm completely in agreement with Ed that this is Di Grassi's best chance of the championship since season 3. I think even though Audi have been, well, I mean, like season 4 was I mean, Audi's car was bulletproof after round 5, but the first 4 races of the season, Lucas Di Grassi was still on nothing because that car was so unreliable. It was quick, but it was unreliable. And then season 5, 6, or 6, obviously, the first year that Lucas didn't win a race in that season, and actually didn't even lead a lap that season. And so season 7 they found their way, but it was never going to be good enough to beat them. But yeah, I'm completely in agreement with the Mercedes in the back of it. I think it's going to be a good car. I don't think this is just Lucas's best chance of the championship. I genuinely think that Venturi could challenge for the constructors title next season. I think that's a stellar lineup. Obviously, yes, as Ed said, I do feel sorry for Norman Nato because he did a fantastic race at the end of the season, but it did come as a bit too little too late. Yes, he was supposed to be on the podium in Rome, and the same again in Valencia. One he was disqualified, when he got a 5-second penalty. But yeah, I think Formula E is very cutthroat. I hope he does find another spot in the grid. Who knows? Maybe a Neo or maybe an Andretti would take him up on it. Who knows? But yeah, I doubt it. But yeah, I genuinely think that Lucas, I think he's definitely called this right. I think 1-year contract. I think we're expecting that to be the case. As you broke in Berlin, Jack, he's happy to chat to McLaren as well and chat to other manufacturers. But yeah, I genuinely think Lucas will be one of the championship contenders, and Venturi will have a shot at the constructors championship, a genuine shot, not like this year's shot at the championship where 6 teams can win it on. At the end of the season, they have a genuine shot at this year's championship,
which would be amazing. Which would be amazing for Venturi and obviously the path. And then you congratulate Susie Wolff massively on the job that she's done, because when she took over that team back in season 5, there was a lot of questions that were raised, like would she be ready? Could she do it? Is she just going to take all the advice from Toto? But she was sort of like pushed aside, sort of like, oh no, she's not going to succeed. And if she was to succeed, it would be a huge story, and a huge story for females in motorsport as well. So if it would be an absolutely amazing story. But I want to move on to the calendar update. So calendar obviously looking brand spanking new, fresh, lots of new faces in there. And now we're potentially getting one of those new faces potentially dropping off the calendar, Ed, in Cape Town. Now obviously it's not official yet. However, Cape Town COVID-19 restrictions still playing havoc, even as we move into 2022 now. Obviously, it would probably still be, but you'd hoping that the world would be moving in the right direction and we wouldn't be having too many calendar dropouts. But it looks like we might have our first one with Cape Town. But they're willing to push back and go in 2023. Basically, the problem is about the civil engineering and actually building the site in time and actually having the people there to actually build it, or having, within the restrictions that are currently in South Africa, which have been restricted a bit further from what they have been prior, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be enough in order to hold an event such as a Formula E event. Ed, views on Cape Town potentially not being on the calendar next season?
Yeah, it would be a shame, because it's always good to have a race on the African continent, especially South Africa, a new venue. Not really one we've seen top levels of the FIA World Championships visiting, not since the days of like the old Kyalami Grand Prix in like the early 90s, when very briefly it was sort of revived after apartheid ended. Yeah, from what I was reading, there was a lot of disputes. A lot of people were unhappy that the way money was, there were certain groups like trying to put pressure to sort of get rid of the race as well. Not just, so it wasn't just the COVID thing sort of forced their hand, but there was already a little bit of political kind of resistance to holding the race, and sort of the extra money having to be spent on the roads. Right? And obviously, I'm not sure if the COVID vaccination rate has been that good in South Africa compared to Europe as well. So it's a bunch of different kind of factors combined together. But hopefully we see Cape Town back for 2023, or for the season 9 rather, for Gen 3. We'll have to see if they bring something else to sort of replace it in the stopgap. But one of the things that's been talked about is Jakarta, but that has its own political issues going on, where it's, if anything, even more unpopular with the locals in certain groups. So we'll have to see how all that pans out in Indonesia, I'm really interested to see which venue, if any, ends up filling that out, or if they end up doing the usual Formula E thing where they take another venue and they make it a double header to sort of compensate. So we'll have to see how that pans out.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask Pico, actually. Is this the Marrakesh? Just, Marrakesh, poor Marrakesh, right? You're off the calendar, you're back on the calendar. You're off the calendar, you're back on the calendar. Yeah, we don't want you, you're back. Can we come back? It feels like, Formula E just can't say goodbye to Marrakesh, right? Because it feels like, I'm surprised. Marrakesh for me is a really good racetrack, and I'm surprised it's not on the calendar, and there must be reasons for why it's not on the calendar. But I feel like every time Formula E can't fill a race, we jump to Marrakesh. And normally when we go to Marrakesh, we get a good race because energy management is so difficult there. And it's a challenge for the drivers, and we get entertaining races. So I'm surprised that Marrakesh isn't on the calendar anyway. But what do you think? Do you think we could be returning to Marrakesh to replace South Africa, which then at least keeps us in the African continent?
I'm going to have a field day with flights next year. I just know it. Yeah. Obviously, I'm gutted Cape Town's off the calendar. I thought, Cape Town would be such an awesome place to go to. But alas, it's looking likely that it's not going to be the case. But yeah, I think Marrakesh. Yeah, I think that's the go-to one to replace it. I'm completely on board with you as well. Marrakesh is throwing up some magnificent races. Jerome D'Ambrosio trying to get it over the line in season 5. I've said Marrakesh has got brilliant races. Can't think of any others. That's good. Oh, the two BMWs coming together.
The same race. Yes.
That was the same race. That was the same race. Can't think of any other races. That's good.
What about the one Rosenquist one?
Well, I was going to say Rosenquist's race. That's exactly the word that was going to come out of my mouth.
Yeah. But it's good, and it produces good racing because it's tight on energy management. It's always been tight on energy management since we went there, and I'm completely in agreement that it should be on the calendar. The fact that Formula E are trying to fill out these races, and they just kind of like fill out the calendar to like make sure that we don't have these gaps, and places like Marrakesh aren't getting on the calendar. I do find that a little bit annoying because I think it is a fantastic track. Another one obviously is Punta del Este, because basically that entire area is run by Julius Baer, who's one of the main sponsors of Formula E. And so, like, at the drop of a hat, if they say, can we go back to Punta, then they'll sign it off and everything's fine. It's just that when you go there, you have to land at Montevideo Airport, then sit on a coach for 3 hours to get to the actual location. But yeah, I think Marrakesh, deserves a permanent place on the calendar like it has done for the last few years. But yeah, I think this on the calendar, off the calendar, I think it's great to have it there as a backup, and so we can go back there. I think if we can't go to China, I reckon that they'll push Marrakesh a little bit back, and then they'll make Mexico a doubleheader or something like that. But there's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts with the calendar. Don't go booking stuff yet.
Agreed.
Or get like a free cancellation hotel.
Yes. Yeah. That's what we need, especially if we're going to be doing lots of flyaways this year on Formula E Zone. Final thing to talk about, lads, then. This new qualifying format that is being touted. A bit different. I think an improvement on the current one. I'm not a big fan of the current one. I think lots of people are not a big fan of the current system where it's done on qualifying order, Group 1. We always have these mixed up grids, which then lead to crashes and not great races. And then a muddled up championship where, we're now asking the question, did Nick de Vries deserve it? Which is wrong to ask, but because it was so tight, we didn't even get past the 100 points. It feels that the qualifying system, with this field being so competitive, played a huge part in the championship, and every driver would tell you that it has. So, let's have a look at this sort of new qualifying format that has been touted, which will be split into two groups of 11 and then go into a very sort of football style quarterfinal, semi-final, final system. Very similar but different in a sense, but similar to the knockout system in Formula 1 where, you'd be knocked out after a certain amount of minutes, but in this time you'd have, you just peak, your groups will be smaller, so you'll have 8 cars in a group, 4 go through, then the semi-final, 2 go through, and then the final, whoever wins the final, congratulations, you're on pole position. Ed, what do you think of this potential new qualifying system? Do you think it will solve Formula E's problems? Do you think it's a fabulous qualifying system? Or do you think it's just better than what we've got at the moment, so that will do?
Well, I suppose the problem is you got to make sure, like we keep saying, when this question comes up, that you don't have all the cars on track at the same time, because the circuit's it's not really, you're not going to get a clean lap in that way, or it's harder to anyway, much harder. But I guess the other thing is, I think no matter what qualifying system they pick, somebody's going to complain that it disadvantaged them, or like, this never would have happened with the old system. They're going to get people nostalgic for the for that old random system that sometimes benefited people in the later groups. But I think it should be a little bit more fair, and the only thing I do to lament about it more than anything else is the loss of Super Pole potentially. That it's just going to be like the final 2 at the end of it once the others all been knocked out, going for pole position. And I sort of like that Super Bowl format where it was just 6, everyone got 1 lap, and that's going to set the top 6 on the grid. And with the new system, I feel like there's a little bit more, not so much that it's all the earlier runs are a bit pointless, but it's a bit more sort of, you do a lap, someone gets knocked out, and everyone goes again. It feels a bit that maybe I've misunderstood it, but that's what I had as how I understood it anyway. And I'm not sure I'm as keen on that, but I think the earlier stages should be a bit fairer and better to watch potentially.
For me, as I see it as, they wanted 2 groups of 11 Pico, so I expect every car to be out, and you'll have like an 8-10 minute session potentially, and then the sessions obviously time gets smaller as the cars whittle down. But I'm hoping that they'd have every car on track, so there's a little bit resemblance to the F1 qualifying system where we'll see who gets it last run and might go fastest and so forth, which might make it quite interesting and knock people out that way. And if they go like that, then I think it'll be quite entertaining. But obviously we just get shorter and shorter, but then the time limits can get shorter and shorter, because I think they could easily fit that in 1 hour. Pico, what do you think of the system?
Well, what I am going to say, Ed, is if anyone does feel a bit nostalgic about the old qualifying system, if any of the drivers say, "Oh, I miss the old qualifying system," I'll do a shoey on this show. That is, I don't see any of those drivers ever getting nostalgic about this qualifying format whatsoever.
Maybe it's just me talking rather than projecting a bit. Yeah,
maybe. But yeah, I think what they've done is they've tried. Yeah, I see the whole like football aspect of doing the like quarterfinal, semi-final, then final. But it starts off basically doing the same as IndyCar. So IndyCar, you've got the 2 groups, and then the top 6 from each group go through to the next session, which is the top 12, and then the 6 from that go into the fast 6 or whatever it's called, or something like that. So it starts more or less the same as IndyCar, and then they make it this football shootout thing, which I'm struggling to get my head around. But I mean, I love watching international football, but I don't think it's the right format for Formula E. I wasn't really promoting it at all, but I was saying that a MotoGP style format would have been better. So have it dependent on the practice, so everyone's best practice time, and then you have the bottom 10 start, top 4 from each session go through to the next one, and then the last session is 10 minute. That way it's top 10 drivers, and then whoever starts on it starts on pole. But I do see how like practice, that even then they don't get their proper laps in. So I do see.
Because that's what I was going to say, because I've brought up that point with Sam Bird, and every time we bring this up, I say, well, Sam Bird said, right? Sam Bird said doesn't work because we don't get clean laps in practice. So that means I might,
if you're in Q1, as long as you're top 4, you get through to the next session, and then the next session after that. And so
But then would you argue it makes practice more important rather than just a practice session?
Obviously, it makes practice somewhat important, but I don't think it really affects it that much. I mean, like, all they're really doing is they always do their 250 laps towards the end of the session anyway. So,
but I suppose it puts more pressure on those 250 laps to make sure that you're in a certain group.
That's my defence here.
I just want to point out something actually about practice, that they're going to shorten it. So instead of being like 45 minutes as it is at the moment, it's going to go down to 30, I think. So that means they've got even less time to do that quali run at the end of through practice. It's usually the second one that they do it, isn't it? Yeah. Whereas now at the moment, some of the teams even sort of almost do like full kind of, not full race runs, but they've definitely got a lot more time to play with in which to do different things. So cutting that is definitely, I think, probably a good move, because it makes things much more interesting going into quali.
I wouldn't mind them shortening it to half an hour if it means it's not at 7 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock in the morning, because trying to get to a media centre for 8 o'clock in the morning, wake it up, it's difficult.
Can't wait for that.
Difficult.
Right? I'm going to have to sleep with the blinds open or something just to get to the track on time.
I understand why there's not many people in the media centre at 8 o'clock in the morning or 7 o'clock or 7:30 in the morning when practice 1 is on, but I'd prefer practice 1. I think as a spectacle, I prefer practice 1 being on Saturday morning than Saturday or Friday night, 5 or 6 p.m. Because straight away, if you do put it on a Friday night, which I don't understand, one, if you're a paying ticket, you've lost 45 minutes of practice because you can't get in on a Friday, which makes no sense. So I don't know how much you paid for an FE ticket, but you've lost 45 minutes of running because you can't watch it. And two, it's harder for people to watch it in Europe. I say Europe, but maybe in other places, America as well, because at least Americans, if they're diehard Formula E fans, they'll stay up through the night to watch it. But obviously, it's the middle of a working day in America. In Europe, people are coming home at that time, so a 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock practice session doesn't really work. So I prefer it to stay on that one-day format rather than what they've been trialing lately for doing it on a Friday, which I'm not. Just been a bit mad.
Yeah, I'm not obsessed with their early mornings either. I mean, I remember, was it the second Rome race this season that started at like midday or 1 o'clock or something like that, and so they had to practice at 6:45 or something. I mean, there's a whole day. There's a whole day. Just do something. Start it later.
Yeah, I feel like this has just turned into we hate waking up in the morning.
I'm going to have a chat to Jamie Regal in Valencia, be like, push it back a bit, mate. I need to get out of bed.
Because the thing is, right, it's a late night Friday, right? You finish, you leave the media centre at like 6 or 7ish, and then you by the time you're back to the hotel, it's already 8, and then you got to eat, and then it's 10, and then you realise, I got to wake up at 5:30. And you're like, where's the time? And you wake up at 5:30, trundling in, there's no transport work, you got to walk to the track, and you're like, oh, it's too early for this. But anyway, I think, boys, we've come to the end of the show. Thank you so much, boys, for being with me.
Pleasure as always, Jack.
Yeah,
sorry about the wait, by the way.
Yep. No worries.
And thank you, obviously, for spending your time and watching. We'll be back in, let's say, a couple of weeks' time to find out what news has crept up. If any sort of cancellations, any more driver news, we'll be covering it and talking about it and the implications as we get closer now to pre-season testing, which will be taking place at the end of November. The 29th of November is the date that is currently around. Again, not being confirmed until like the 1st of December. So it's only 3 days in Valencia. Hopefully, we'll have our man, Mr. Jack Pickering, on the ground. So hopefully, plenty of updates and stuff to come from testing, so please look out for the YouTube channel around then. Thank you so much for watching. We've been Formula E Zone. Goodbye.